Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host from coast to coast, and you are watching One Man's Worldview. This is my second video, so what I would like for you to do is hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to share it with your families and friends. It will really help a brother out. Today I want to talk about the educational system and the prison system and how both of them relate to each other. How the problems, plague our neighborhoods, our cities, and what are the solutions that we can probably implement to solve this problem. To me, my synopsis about the whole thing is poverty. The more poverty there is, the more crime will exist. And this is anecdotally true to neighborhoods with blacks, Hispanics, and poor working families. So what I want to do to start this off is I want to play a few videos, and we're going to comment on those videos. And this will get you a good feel of what this video is about and what I'm trying to express.
For decades, we've heard politicians and the media lambast public schools as failing and broken and denounce the corrupt teachers' unions for protecting lazy and bad teachers. If you look at the statistics, that appears to be the case. You see a story of declining test scores and mediocre student performance. In 2018, the United States performed worse than Lithuania and Vietnam in mathematics on international testing. The antidote prescribed by the establishment experts is simple: privatization and deregulation. But what if they're wrong? What if the root causes plaguing our public schools are instead poverty, hypersegregation, and chronic disinvestment? What if we examine public schools not as isolated institutions, but within a larger political and economic context that deprives children, families, and their communities of basic livelihoods?
And I'd just like to stop it right there. My thing is, if you don't have a well-informed, well-educated population, the country will not survive. You have to help people to run the machines, people to program the computers, people to heal the sick, and I do mean heal, not treat with pharmaceuticals that give you 1,000 side effects. But anyway, the thing about it is, if the population is well educated and have good health care, our economy will boom by default. But that's just a thought. Let's continue the video.
In the late 1980s, renowned writer Jonathan Kozol barnstormed the country for 2 years, visiting and documenting his observations in schools in urban and suburban neighborhoods. Reporting from East St. Louis, he noted in his harrowing book, Savage Inequalities, that schools were overcrowded. Children did not have sufficient books, paper, computers, and other resources. Science labs were outdated by a half century. And improper heating made some classrooms freeze and others boil, sometimes reaching 100 degrees. As Kozol put it, one searches for some way to understand why a society as rich and frequently as generous as ours would leave these children in their penury and squalor for so long, and with so little public indignation.
I'll tell you why. 2 words: white supremacy.
Contrary to popular belief, more than a quarter century later, public schools across the United States remain starved of resources. That's because the U.S. is unique in how it funds schools. School funding is determined largely by local property taxes, meaning that wealthy, largely white children are educated in gleaming palaces, while poor, black, Latino, and indigenous children are often confined to crumbling schools with crowded classrooms, zero-tolerance discipline, poorly paid teachers and staff, and lack of access to school nurses, librarians, and social workers. Consider a tale of 2 school systems. In rich, predominantly white Lower Merion, a suburb of Philadelphia, schools spend more than $26,000 per student. And just a few miles away, the diverse Philadelphia schools, which serve predominantly poor and working class children, spend less than $15,000 per student.
Yeah, they're on the other side of the railroad tracks.
This is a nationwide phenomenon. In 2016, majority-minority school districts received $23 billion less in funding than majority-white districts, despite serving the same number of students. This is apartheid-style education. Instead of addressing these inequities, the federal government has doubled down on a market-based approach. Private foundations, think tanks, and both Democratic and Republican officials have fought for a corporate makeover of the public education system. They champion austerity measures, high-stakes standardized testing, school closures, expansion of no-excuses charter schools, a weakening of teachers' unions, and stiff disciplinary methods. This has been the major approach of education reform for the last 2 decades.
Now, I just don't see how any of that has a positive impact on anything. I just don't understand. People, you have to know that when things are happening, like our educational system, we're in the richest country in the world. We should have the best education system in the world. It does not make any sense. The austerity, the racism, the white supremacy. Why are these things happening? Do you actually think it happens in nature? No. It's because somebody wants it that way. I hope my audience realize that that's something that I'm going to say throughout the whole entire podcast on just about every video. Things don't happen, issues don't happen, not because it happens out of nature, but what I'm trying to convey is that somebody is implementing these things. And I do dare say they know the outcome. They know the intentions. They know what's going to happen, but they do it anyway, all in the name of the mighty dollar and white supremacy. Let's continue this video.
In 2001, the No Child Left Behind Act, signed into law by President George Bush, with bipartisan approval, imposed stringent testing measures for elementary and middle school students. Those schools that didn't make adequate annual progress risked being labeled as a failing school, having all or parts of its staff fired, shut down, converted into a charter school, taken over by the state, or privatized. Then there was the Race to the Top program, a $4 billion grant competition under the Obama administration. In order to qualify for federal education funding, states were required to adopt an ensemble of policies in their schools: performance-based teacher evaluations, more standardized tests, more charter schools, and more interventions in failing schools, closures, privatizations, and takeovers. Under the logic of the school reformers, superintendents get called CEOs. Schools in poor communities, especially Black, Latino, and Indigenous ones, are ranked, sanctioned, shut down, and turned over to private management based on student test scores. Teachers are fired and punished based on student performance, and their ratings are sometimes published in newspapers. Segregated charter schools are opened to create an educational free market to promote competition with public schools. In New York City alone, more than 100,000 students, or 1 in 10 in the city, were homeless. About 34,000 of them came to school from homeless shelters. Millions more children across the U.S., about 15% of all children, live in poverty. It is one of the highest rates in the industrialized world. That rate is far above the 4% figure in Scandinavian countries. Former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan once said that it is opportunity, not poverty, that shapes children's destiny. But we know the effects of poverty on children: malnutrition, stunted development, mental illness, and low academic achievement.
And they punish these schools. I'm going to talk about the theory of problem, action, reaction, solution. Again, it's problem, reaction, solution. These bureaucrats bureaucrats create these problems to get a reaction out of the public, and then they offer the solution. Usually the solution hurts people and not help them. Let's continue.
If the corporate school reformers were really committed to making life better for the poorest children in our country, they would stop making such asinine comments and declare, as educator Kenzo Shibata once said, poverty shouldn't be, period. It's not actually that hard to imagine what is necessary to transform the lives of the most vulnerable. It doesn't require more charter schools or more standardized testing. Rather, in line with other countries, we could guarantee an unconditional sum of $250 a month per child per family to pay for...
And it's called universal basic income.
Diapers, food, clothing, and other child care costs. This measure alone would cut the child poverty rate by 40% and slash deep poverty in half. It would be the most substantive expansion of the social safety net for children in the modern history of the United States. If we are to guarantee an equitable public education worthy of the dignity of all children, there is no better place to begin than waging an assault on the moral scandal of child poverty in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. I'm Nikhil Goyal, sociologist and PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge for the Gravel Institute.
And now we'll leave the link to that video at the bottom of the page if you want to view it yourself. All the videos that I do play will be for educational purposes and for fair use. So, with that said, I'm going to come out of here, and we're going to go to our next video. Now, like I was saying before, poverty has a link to the educational system, and that link is that it causes students to perform very bad. If you're in a good public school or good charter school, you're going to perform good because the instructors there are trained better. The classroom is less crowded. The children can think more clearly because they're fed and not hungry, or fed the good food, for their brains and everything, for good nootropic activities. But at the same time, if you really think about it, in order for our education system to be transformed, we really need to stop putting money into these prison systems, and also stop putting money into these wars. It doesn't make any sense. The United States called this thing called the Department of Defense when it's more like the Department of War and Offense. I have never really experienced or can recall another country coming over to our land and just straight out attacking, bombing us. I have never, ever in my lifetime remember anything like that happening. I'm 48 years old. So it doesn't make sense for them to put in almost $800 billion a year into war when our educational system is suffering so much. I'm going to keep saying this. Things the way they are only because somebody wants it that way. So next, I want to play this video about the prison system. And you're going to see how all this links up to the educational system. I mean, just by the United States just being unfair can just ruin somebody's life, where they just die poor, uneducated, have nothing to show for, nothing to leave they relatives and they kinfolk or their children. But anyway, let me stop ranting. I want to go ahead and play this next video. Again, this video is from the Gravel Institute. I kind of like the Gravel Institute. It really laid down leftist ideas and Christ-like type of solutions that can help this country and the world throughout. Let me start talking here, and I'm gonna go ahead and play this video, and I will leave the link at the bottom of the page. Let's go.
Marijuana, he'd been legally prescribed to treat a traumatic brain injury. Fairwayne Bryan, 63 years old, sentenced to life in prison for stealing a pair of hedge clippers because 18 years before he had been convicted of robbing a taxi driver. Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old held in prison for 3 years in New York for allegedly stealing a backpack. Charged, but never put on trial. Beaten by prison guards and placed in solitary confinement for 2 years, he attempted suicide twice in prison. Still traumatized, he committed suicide at his mother's home after being released. These are just 3 drops in a sea of similar stories all across the United States. Why are these stories so common? One of the ugly truths about our country is that we lock up a higher percentage of our people than any other nation on earth. In fact,
that's a damn shame, y'all. Land of the free, home of the brave, my eye.
In fact, we imprison more people than any other country, period. We're the biggest prison in the world. We have a significantly larger prison population, 2.1 million people, than China, a country with 3 times our population. Why does the United States lock up so many of it?
Because of money. Because of profit. Just about any institution that the United States is involved in, always trying to privatize something. When it comes to health in the prison system, even right to develop weapons of mass destruction, none of that type of crap should be privatized. Let's go ahead with the video.
Its people, more than the entire population of New Mexico. Where did this wholesale imprisonment of huge groups of people, what we call mass incarceration, come from? Let's go back a few decades. Starting in the 1960s, many companies looking to cut costs moved production out of big cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, or simply automated away big chunks of their workforce. Their employees were left jobless, and manufacturing was ripped out of great cities that used to be synonymous with industry. After 1970, unemployment for non-college educated men soared, especially black people who were just then entering the middle class. People who could leave the cities, mostly middle-class whites, fled to the suburbs, a phenomenon we call white flight. This led to a vicious spiral. Cities lost tax revenue, schools lost funding, houses lost their value, local economies collapsed, job opportunities dried up. As urban poverty rose, crime rose with it, and the arrival of crack cocaine in the 80s, helped along by U.S. foreign policy in Central America, made the problem even worse. By the 19...
And just to throw a little tidbit in there. You know, Joe Biden is the architect of the 1994 crime bill. This dude is a liar and a hypocrite. I'll tell you why. His son Hunter Biden is a crackhead. How come he don't have his ass in jail? How come he gets a free pass and just keeps making a lot of money? That's because Joe Biden is a liar and a hypocrite. Just like I said in my last video, look at what these people are doing. Forget about what they're saying. Forget about it being a D in front of their name representing the Democrat. Forget about it being a R in front of their name representing the Republican. Because these parties are bought by the same people. the people that want to privatize everything, buy everything. Bill Gates owns more land than any person in the world right now. Why do you think he's doing stuff like that? These people shouldn't have this much money. They shouldn't own this much stuff. It doesn't make any sense when you got so many others suffering. Let's continue.
In the 70s and 80s, there was a full-blown social crisis in American cities, resulting in a steady increase in crime. Now, American politicians could have responded one way. They could have confronted the root causes of crime by reinvesting in hollowed-out cities, building...
They could, but they didn't want it that way.
A healthier, cleaner, more prosperous society. But that is not what they did. Instead, they unleashed a tsunami of incarceration. They chose to lock up millions of people, rather than accept the type of broad redistribution of wealth, jobs, and power that a real solution would have demanded. Mass incarceration is expensive. But for the well-off, it turns out to be a lot cheaper than actually solving the problem.
So the
U.S.
money.
government decided to combine the harshest penal state in the world with the stingiest welfare state. This carceral approach was also effective politics, with white voters terrified of rising crime from increasingly non-white cities. Republicans and Democrats alike saw a way to exploit racist fears and get cheap votes. It started with Richard Nixon's promise of law and order in 1968.
Oh, dick.
Ronald Reagan vowed to get tough on crime in the 80s.
The do Ron.
By 1996, a Democrat like Hillary Clinton was warning of young, quote, super predators with, quote, no conscience, no empathy, people who
She
must
doesn't
be,
have any
quote,
conscience or
brought
empathy
to
either.
heel. Over those decades, politicians from both parties and at all levels passed harsher and harsher laws feeding the prison system. The war on drugs started in 1971. Cruel mandatory minimum laws came in the 1980s. 3 strikes laws arrived in the 90s. You could be put away for life without parole for stealing a pair of socks if it was your third offense. Tough on...
Do you know why they did that? Stealing a pair of socks, think about that. You steal a pair of socks 3 times, you can be put in prison for the rest of your life. That's how this bill was crafted. Joe Biden said something, and I think I'm butchering this statement, but he said that this crime bill would put a jaywalker in prison for life. Why would you want to do something like that? These people are sickos.
Crime prosecutors and judges gained office across the country. Huge sums of money were spent on building new prisons, which housed millions of people. As a result, incarceration rose dramatically. In 1968, America's prison population was 102 per 100,000 people, in line with other developed countries. By 2005, it had risen 7-fold to 737 per 100,000, the highest.
No, you see that? That's pretty high. What did they say, about 700? Let's say 700. And that's per 100,000 people, right? So let's go to a calculator here. I want to see what this is. So we're going to pull up a calculator here. And it's around, I'll say, 350 million people in the United States. We're going to divide that by 700. That's 500,000 people. That's nuts. That is crazy. Wow. But let's get back to the video. And let's continue.
In the world. Even as crime fell, with murders in New York dropping 90% in the 90s, mass incarceration kept on growing. Why didn't prison populations fall once crime started declining? It's because prisons are by no means only about crime. They're also about keeping the least advantaged people in line. Prison has become the place to warehouse people with mental illnesses, people experiencing homelessness, and people with addictions that the system is not designed to help. Instead of solving these problems, we use prison to disappear the people who have these problems. With this surging population, prisons are crowded and violent. People in prison are robbed of their humanity, often brutalized by guards, and without real rehabilitation or good options for reentry into society, are sometimes turned into the hardened criminals the system believes them to be. That's why academic evidence suggests that prisons make people more likely to engage in criminal behavior, not less. You can't eradicate crime without eradicating the root causes of crime, including prison. And it was poor and non-white communities that were the hardest hit. Hurt by deindustrialization and then criminalized by the state, black men born between 1965 and 1969 have been more likely to go to prison than to graduate from college. Less educated people in general are victim to this. A white man without a high school degree has a 25% chance of being imprisoned in his lifetime. A black man without a high school degree has a 70% chance. Mass incarceration has done massive harm to our communities, our families, our children, and to the millions of people caught up in it. Mass incarceration cannot exist in a healthy society. It is an intentional humanitarian disaster, a war by the ruling class on the poor and the marginalized. Mass incarceration is a choice, but it's their choice, not ours. This is Chase Madar, Professor of Law for the Gravel Institute.
All right. I know I talk too much. You know, some of these stats and numbers, they really piss me off and makes me want to say something about it, you know. These things don't have to be. Ladies and gentlemen, just don't have to be. We live in a society ruled by the elite that only can govern within their bubble. They can only govern from what they can see. You'll never see Joe Biden hanging out in the hood, all right, to see what's going on. You'll never see that. So therefore, he's just going to make his wild guess on how to handle anything that might be wrong in that particular area. But he would never imagine it or see it or experience that. So, you know, the thing about it is, I would dare say, stop electing rich people to office. It needs to be working people. People in the community needs to hold this power. Not the elite and the rich and the well off, because they gonna govern as if everybody is well off. I mean, people like I don't know, Bill Gates probably has never eaten a pack of ramen noodles. He probably has never experienced that, powdered eggs or milk or something like that. He has never had to experience that. He gets the best organic food, the cleanest water. Why do you think rich people last so long? So, you know, enough with my ranting on. I'm going to go ahead and get with this last video. I want y'all to pay close attention because I think it's one of the most important videos. This next video is about how America's justice system is rigged against the poor. Remember at the beginning of the video, I said that we're going to look into a deep dive of how poverty relates to education and prison. This video would basically sum it all up. So, let's go. I will leave the link at the bottom of the video.
I think most Americans believe that after you commit a crime and pay your debt to society, the punishment ends. You have the chance to rebuild your life and get a fresh start.
Yeah,
but the
right.
reality is much harsher. We punish people with criminal records long after they've paid their debt to society, and we all suffer for it. Even simply being accused of a crime is just the beginning of perpetual punishment. A cycle of legalized discrimination, poverty, and reincarceration, a cycle kept in motion by 47,000 laws and regulations nationwide that restrict critical rights and opportunities. After contact with the criminal justice system, millions of Americans are denied employment and housing, denied college educations, excluded from public benefits, separated from their children.
Now, do you see that? Try to get a job. Yeah, no entry. Try to get a place to live. Nobody won't rent to you. Then you try to go to school. Nobody doesn't want to teach you anything. And then when you end up back, see that door wide open? Let's continue.
Deported despite being legal residents and deprived of the right to vote. These restrictions trap the poor and people of color in invisible cages that extend far beyond prison.
On that right to vote type of crap. 13% of the population is African American. 40% of the prison population is African American. To me, that just seemed like some agenda to get rid of most of all the black votes. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if somebody was thinking that. Remember, these folks think way ahead. They cause things to happen so it can cause a reaction for something else to happen. Kind of like a chemical reaction. They know poverty is not going to do anything as far as benefiting the American poor. They know that they're going to be in there and not learn what they need to learn in order to get along in this economy. I mean, they don't even teach in a course a good, clear understanding on how money works economically. They don't teach investment. They don't teach savings, which is one of the most important things. That's one of the things that education needs to be reformed about, is teaching kids about money, savings, and investing. But they don't do that. And I don't understand that. Teaching some, having knowledge is the half the battle, but applying that knowledge is the other half. Let's continue the video.
Walls and criminal courts. Cages that lead to a lifetime of obstacles that undermine even the most earnest efforts at rehabilitation and redemption. Cages that send the message, you will never be a part of society again. This is not some isolated problem. 95% of all incarcerated people will return home at some point. Each year, more than 600,000 people are released from jails and prisons. That's roughly the population of Boston or Seattle. Millions more are completing non-jail sentences like probation, community service, or fines. As reentry specialist at Brooklyn Defender Services, a public defense firm representing 45,000 clients per year, I work on the front lines to help people with criminal histories overcome their past and navigate the obstacles of their present so they can build a sustainable future. I try to help folks take responsibility for their own lives, but it's hard to do when the outlook is so bleak. Even for low-level offenses and misdemeanors, the aftermath of one individual's experience with the criminal justice system ripples out to entire families and neighborhoods and gets passed down from generation to generation. The result, more poverty, more crime, more incarceration.
And the people who own these private prisons know that. They know what they're doing. It's to keep fueling the private prison industry. It's a damn shame, man.
See Javon An 18-year-old young man who cannot live with or even visit his family, and cannot find an affordable apartment because he was convicted of gun possession and banned from all public housing. I see the dangerous shelters and street corners where he'll sleep. I worry about what he's going to have to do to survive, how long it'll be before he's back behind bars. I see how society loses when Judy, a 58-year-old grandmother charged with a misdemeanor, is fired after her arrest and barred from her lifelong profession as a home health aide. Unable to work, she's faced with eviction and can't support her family. When Malik, a 26-year-old father, is denied the opportunity to further his education because of the mistakes of his past, I think about how he and so many others are set up to fail. How a conviction on a rap sheet is only a snapshot of a moment in time, when all of us are dynamic, changing over time. The criminal justice system disenfranchises these men and women, preventing them from growing, from truly being free. I am among the very few fortunate enough to be living a second chance. 3 decades ago, I was involved in a crime that took the life of another human being. I spent over 24 years in prison for my role in that reprehensible crime. While incarcerated, I had the chance to participate in a pilot program offered to only 15 inmates that allowed me to pursue a formal education. Upon release, I found an employer willing to look beyond my criminal record, one that saw the hard lessons.
And see, that's a solution right there. That type of opportunity should be offered to all non-violent criminals, all non-violent drug offenders. That particular opportunity, matter of fact, there was this one guy, one of my colleagues in the military, and I was in the Army back in 1992. He told me that he got in trouble, about drugs, and the judge gave him choice. He said, you either go to jail or you go to the Army. So he chose the Army. Sometimes you have to do that. I mean, I don't like the military at all, but at least the military will give them an opportunity to pay for their education and to serve their country. So, I mean, a lot of times these judges don't offer that. They just rather just put you in jail and fill the prison, the private prison complex. So that's what that's all about.
I learned in prison as an asset, not a liability. Affording people a real opportunity to re-enter society isn't just good for individuals and families. It's good for all of us. Meaningful re-entry increases productivity, reduces poverty, and saves money. Most importantly, it makes us safer by eliminating the circumstances that perpetuate cycles of crime and punishment. People already get punished harshly by the system, but they shouldn't receive a second sentence that makes discriminating against them legal for the rest of their lives.
Right.
By restoring full rights of citizenship to people after they've been through the system, we can start to end this cycle of perpetual punishment. We can start to abolish the justice trap.
All right. So, I hope you learned something from those few videos. And to end this off, when a child is born, and he's born into a certain environment, that environment will undoubtedly shape his destiny and his future. The United States needs to start investing in our children, in our environment, in our healthcare system, in our educational system. They need to just stop all of these wars, shut down all these military bases. We got about 1,000 military bases, and that's just the ones that are known. There's no telling how many underground or in the polar ice or on Mars or on the moon, and just no telling. And they spend trillions of dollars over a couple of decades on this stuff. And our country has infrastructure, gets a grade of a C- or a D or something like that, and we're the richest country in the world. It does not make any sense. It's like somebody is trying to destroy this country. This country it really had me tricked at a young age when I joined the military. I thought this was the most democratized, the most free country in the world. Boy, I was wrong. To have where you have a prison population that is bigger than China, and China got way more people in it. That doesn't make any sense. That means that the United States set out laws and policies and rules and legislation to lock up as many people as they could, especially working people, poor people, black people, Hispanic people. That was their plan, to make you less of a citizen, so your voice doesn't count. They do this other than just trying to fuel for money. They also do these things because of elections. Believe when I tell you, they rather have more of a European population voting for them because they know they would keep power. But if you got a growing population of indigenous people, and I will say that black people are the indigenous Indians in America, not the Native Americans that you see today. But that's another story for another time. But I want to conclude that in order for us to make any improvements in this country, we have to start with the children. We have to start with the environment, the education. And you can't do that by keeping a whole entire society down. It just won't happen. And I just get sick and tired of all these politicians speaking the rhetoric like they want to change something. If they really want to change something, they would have changed it by now. It doesn't make any sense for these particular issues to keep continuing decade after decade after decade unless somebody wants it that way. And with that said, don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share this video. And I wanted to tell everybody to have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening. Peace. I'm out.